second session, and yeah. Originally, it was planned that we were going to have 3 sessions, but I think we're going to kind of conclude today as the last session. So, over to Maharaj. Sorry, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna. Okay, so we started the story of Gopa Kumar, who got a guru from his mantra from his guru, but didn't know what the mantra was really. But he chanted it, and he became detached, and then he wandered around, and then he became a king. Then he resigned, and he became another king in Puri. Then he resigned again. Eventually, he went up to Svargaloka. He became Indra. Then he resigned from that. He went higher up to Mahaloka, and then finally he got to Brahmaloka, and he became Brahma. And then he decided he didn't want to be Brahma anymore. And then the Supreme Lord, the Mahapurush on Brahmaloka, told him he should go back to Mathura because he would be more satisfied. He would attain his real goal there in meeting the Lord. Even though he had met the Lord of course, Puri, he had the deity, and other places he had deities, and then he went to Svargaloka, and then he had Vamanadev, Upendra, as his deity, who was actual person of the Supreme Lord. And finally, in Brahmaloka, he had the form of Vishnu, but he was somewhat dissatisfied even there. So that Vishnu form told him, go back to Mathura and your desire will be fulfilled. So he went back to Mathura, but in Brahmaloka, every time is very different. And so he was there some, maybe, I don't know how long, some days or months or whatever. When he got back, it was, the whole world had changed, but only place in the whole material world which is the same was Mathura district. And so he had the same forests and the same mountains, etc. as before. And when he got there, he also met his guru. And that guru then told him various rules for worshipping and meditating on the mantra. So usually mantras are not like Hare Krishna and you just chant anything, no rules. There are specific rules and ways you have to chant the mantra. So he taught him some of the rules at that time. And then the guru promised that you will know everything. He taught him, and even untaught things he'll realize through sadhana, through the power of the mantra. So in this way, he was somewhat satisfied. Okay, is this actually? Are we in the? Is this one showing the full screen or not?
Oh, it doesn't seem like
it. Doesn't look like it. And, okay. No, we got it. Okay. So when he started to chant the mantra according to his guru, he got a spiritual body. This was actually promised by his guru who he met in Puri. He said, you'll get a body which will never be destroyed. So at this point, he got a body beyond the material elements, and then he began to travel through the different planetary systems. He went upwards and upwards through the various planets, and then eventually he went beyond Brahmaloka, and he went through the coverings of the universe. So if you read the 5th canto of Bhagavatam, that describes how there's different coverings of elements. We have the earth and the water and the fire and ether and other subtle elements that also, one after the other, each 10 times thicker than the next. So they weren't just layers of matter, they were actually worlds in which one could enjoy very nicely, more than in Brahmaloka. So Gopa Kumar was able to see all of this. And so he went through the various layers. And in those layers, there were different forms of the Lord presiding over the place. And people would worship that form of the Lord. So in the earth element layer, he saw Varaha, who's naturally he, as the avatar, he lifted up the Bhumandala from the ocean. So he's in charge of this earth element in the layers of the universe. And of course, after that, he went to the water level, and there he saw Matsya avatar. And above that, Surya in the fire layer, and then in the air and air layer, and Aniruddha in the ether layer, and Sankarshan in the false ego layer, and Vasudeva in the Mahatattva layer, one after the other. And these places were very opulent, so one after the other, and more subtle, because as we go from the gross elements up to the subtle elements, obviously the enjoyment is very, very subtle. Finally, you got to the last layer, which was Prakriti, a very huge layer. And in Prakriti, the presiding deity was Mohini Avatar, as a form of a woman, but she's also a form of Vishnu. And so she was a very beautiful woman, of course. And she greeted him very nicely, and she offered him liberation, because she's in charge of Prakriti, so she can make Prakriti dissolve. So she offered him liberation, but Gopa Kumar was not much interested. And beyond that, then there's another place called Mahakalapura, which is beyond Prakriti. So in this place, it's a little bit impersonal, because it's very, very subtle, and the forms are not so clear. But Gopa Kumar was concentrating on the deity's mantra, so he never got attracted to that effulgence of Mahakala, which means great time. But there was, in that place, this, we can say this is Shiva's abode, beyond Prakriti. As we see in Brahma Samhita also, there is Devi Dham, and then there is Shiva Dham, and then Vaikuntha Dham, Vishnu Dham. So Shiva and Parvati were in this particular layer, beyond matter. But of course, they are Vaishnavas, so Shiva was always doing kirtan, and he had his companions there as well. And they're all devotees of sorts, but his followers also worshipped Shiva. So the Vishnu Dutas happened to arrive in this place, that is Shiva Loka, and Ganesh explained to Gopa Kumar the nature of these persons. He began to praise the servants of Vishnu, who were very effulgent, and he explained how they preach devotion everywhere, and even if the people chant Namabas, the Vishnu Dutas will come and they will save that person. So he was very pleased with that. And Shiva himself began to talk about the different places that one could go to. So after you've given up all selfish motives and you perfected all the dharmic duties, then you can understand about Vishnu. And there are successive places, higher and higher and higher. So ultimately, if you go to Vaikuntha, this is hundreds of times greater than any planet like Brahmaloka. And then the Vishnu Dutas also spoke, and they began to explain Bhakti to Gopa Kumar. And they said, if you want to reach Vaikuntha, you have to give up everything in the material world and practice pure bhakti with the 9 different forms, like hearing, chanting, remembering, archana, etc. You have to respect the Srimad Bhagavatam and other scriptures that talk of devotional service. You should hear these scriptures and understand the Lord's pastimes from these scriptures. So the Vishnu Dutas encouraged Gopa Kumar to go to Vaikuntha through the process of bhakti. So the Vishnu Dutas glorified bhakti, and they particularly glorified kirtan. So up till now, Gopa Kumar was chanting his mantra. This was not kirtan. This was a silent mantra that he chanted like japa. So it wasn't kirtan. But the Vishnu Dutas began to glorify all those types of devotional service, but particularly they also glorified kirtan as a very powerful means. Okay? So in this way they give a little hint that he should start Nam Sankirtan. though all the processes of bhakti are wonderful and powerful, the main process is Nam Sankirtan, chanting the name of the Lord. So in this way, one can advance very, very quickly. If you want to go to Vaikuntha, you can go there. If you want to go to Goloka, you can go there. Right? So the Vishnudutas said that this is the best process. Chanting the name is the best process. So in this way, they encouraged them to take up the chanting process. So they explain a little bit of the reasoning. If we do kirtan, we can control speech because kirtan is basically speaking. So speech has to be controlled because through that speech, then all of our internal and external organs are set in motion. And if it's material speech, then our senses will get directed towards material objects. Mind will be directed towards material objects. If we speak something spiritual, then the senses and the mind will also become spiritual. So it's a very powerful process. So in the initial stages, it's easier to do kirtan than other processes. And when we're advanced, it's always advisable to do kirtan. And even remembrance, which was praised by the inhabitants of Tapaloka, the yogis there, even that becomes superior by the chanting process. So in other words, chanting will also aid smaranam, or remembrance. So the method by which we can get spiritual taste and feel satisfaction and joy, that's considered to be the best method. And Sankirtan is that method which will give joy, satisfaction. It will help you to concentrate the mind and meditate properly. And by perfecting meditation through kirtan, then if we do that meditation, that will give us even better kirtan. So kirtan and meditation mutually support each other. So they're actually one. So of all the different types of kirtan, chanting the name of Krishna is the best. And through that one we get Krishna prema. So even though they were servants of Vishnu, they were actually telling Gopa Kumara to chant the name of Krishna. So we chant the name as sadhana, like other processes of bhakti, but eventually we get the goal, which is prema. So we call the name is the sadhana, but it's also the goal. Prema is also a type of bhakti. That's called the sadhya. Kirtan is the sadhana. It's also the sadhya. It's also the goal. So we don't give up chanting when we get perfection. We continue to chant, but it takes the form of prema. They began to praise, the Vishnudutas began to praise Gopa Kumara because Gopa Kumara was attracted to Krishna. So that's very rare. And even if the inhabitants of Tapaloka, the yogis, would give arguments and you have to meditate and do everything else, he never gave up his attraction to Krishna. So therefore they thought he was very, very determined to get Krishna. So that's why they taught him to do kirtan. Okay. So then the Vishnudutas, when they finished their explanation of bhakti, they told him, you should follow the order of Shiva and leave this place and go back to Mathura again. Actually, he had gone down from Brahmaloka, he went down to Mathura, or then he went upward to Shiva Loka. Now the Vishnudutas and Shiva are telling him, go back to Mathura again. Because, of course, Mathura, Vrindavan, the place itself is very, very powerful, as we see in Nectar Devotion. there are 5 powerful elements there, and one is living in the holy Dham. So it's a very, very powerful means of advancing in devotional service, particularly for attaining Krishna. So Gopakumar went back to Vrindavan, and he met his guru again, who was called Jayanta, and he began to perform his bhakti, and he chanted the names of Krishna. He did kirtan. He started doing kirtan finally. So long he was doing his japa, now he started doing kirtan, and he experienced prema. So the Vishnu Dutas came. They were very happy. They came with their 4 arms, and they said, "Oh, very good. We'll give you 4 arms like us." And he said, "I don't want it. I don't want 4 arms." So they took him upwards in one of their airplanes, and they went again through the coverings of the universes, past liberation, Shiva's abode, and they got to Vaikuntha, because that's where they reside. So there's a very interesting story here about he goes to Vaikuntha, and then the Vishnu Dutas, the servants, they say, well, you have to stay outside for a little while because we have to see if Vishnu's there and get permission to bring you in. So they went inside the gates of Vaikuntha. Vaikuntha is a huge fortress in the spiritual sky with doors, and actually there's 7 layers, like in Srirangam, 7 layers of walls, each with gates on the 4 sides. So you get four gates, 4 gates, 4 gates, and 7 layers. And in the center we have the palace of Vishnu himself. So the Vishnu Dutas, the servants, they went inside there and they told him to wait outside. So he was waiting there. And as he was waiting, then he saw various people coming there and going into that Vaikuntha. Very remarkable people. Some had 4 heads, some had 10 heads, some had 100 heads. All sorts of people, Devatas and others, they were able to get there somehow or other, and they're going to that place. So this was very astonishing. And some of them looked like Vishnu, and he thought some of them were Vishnu, but they kept saying, no, we're not Vishnu. We're only servants of Vishnu. And some of them he saw they had great powers. They could attain any form they wanted. So they could change their form and become an animal, for instance, and they could, or a butterfly or whatever, a bird, run around the trees and whatever like that, and they would come back to their form again. So they all had great powers. But they would only use these powers as to serve Vishnu. They weren't doing it for their own satisfaction. Anyway, he saw all these powers of these servants of the Lord. And they all had eternal bodies because they were in Vaikuntha. So they took these forms, various forms, to please the Lord only. That's all. So the Vishnu Dutas came out and then they escorted him in. But he was so astonished when he saw some of the guards looked like Vishnu. He thought they were Vishnu. He kept offering obeisances to these different guards at the different doors as he went through. But they kept saying, no, you can't do that. We're not Vishnu. And finally he got to the center area, and then he saw Vishnu on his throne. A very royal throne made out of gold, jewels. And Gopa Kumar, of course, because he saw the Lord directly, then he felt very, very blissful. And he also forgot what the attendants said. The attendants said, you cannot act spontaneous. You have to be very full of reverence and respect. But then Gopa Kumar was so happy, he began to call out to the Lord, oh Gopal, my life and soul. And he began to run towards him to embrace him, just like people run for Jagannath, try to embrace Jagannath. So he began running towards the Supreme Lord Vishnu like this. But then they stopped him. He had to control himself. So the Supreme Lord was very, very kind, and he welcomed Gopa Kumar. He actually recognized him. And he said, I'm very fortunate to meet you. And for a long time, I've been eager to see you. And I've been hoping that you would come here. And many, many births you went through, and I was praying that you would somehow come here. And each lifetime, no, it didn't come. Next lifetime didn't come. Next life didn't come. But he was, Vishnu said, I'm very, very eager that you would come here, and finally you've come. And then he explained, actually, I went down to Vrindavan when you were there as the cowherd boy, and I became the guru. So he was the one that gave him the Krishna mantra. So he took the name Jayanta, the guru, and Vishnu himself gave the mantra to that boy, and that started his journey. And finally he got to Vishnu, not only through the mantra, but through the chanting of the name, Nam Sankirtan. So he was in Vaikuntha. Wonderful. There was directly the Lord was there. Everything was very, very full of opulence, power, splendor. But Gopa Kumara was not much interested in any of that. And the other people there would say, well, look, you have to, act like other people, and you have to dress like them, and you have 4 arms like us. You're not acting properly. You look like a poor cowherd boy, so that's not very proper, and they would discourage him in that way. Of course, the opulences of Vaikuntha were spiritual. He was not much attracted to those things. So he was a little bit saddened by this event, people discouraging him in that way. And they also told me you shouldn't act in this very spontaneous way. You have to control yourself. Don't sing for him as praises in the spontaneous way. You have to chant the standard prayers, very formally, like the Rig Veda or something like that. Then you have to do things very formally. You can't just start chanting anything you want. So they discouraged him to some degree. And he was also discouraged because he didn't see the form, and it was in his mantra. He was chanting this Gopa mantra with the form of Krishna, and he wasn't so satisfied with that. Sometimes, of course, Vishnu himself would take a particular form that looked like Krishna, like he was expanded into a form, and he'd play like the cowherd boys. But then Gopa Kumara understood this is actually Vishnu. And this way he was a little bit dissatisfied. Others, of course, who were in Vaikuntha, they encouraged him and said, yes, the Sankirtan is the best of activities, and you should continue that, and you should sing for Vishnu also, because he's also pleased with that. So some people were encouraging him. Then Narada Muni came. And he gave very profound instructions to Gopa Kumara. So he said that if you long for a certain relationship or a taste in relation to the Lord, that's what you will get when you get perfection. So whatever you desired, then you can attain that in Vaikuntha. And you will take the corresponding form so you can serve properly. And that is why the Vishnudutas got 4-arm forms, because they were attached to worshipping Vishnu, so they got forms like him. So the whatever we establish as our sadhana, that attains its perfection and prema, and then we get a form to correspond with that mood that we worship the Lord in. As far as Vaikuntha was concerned, the form there is a Vishnu form, Narayana. But the devotees there, even though they see Narayana, if they aspired for some other avatar form and they went there, then they can also see that avatar form there in the Vishnu. And Vishnu may assume those forms also. Others may not be attracted to a particular form, like all forms. So therefore they can worship all forms, they can see all forms also. Others prefer to worship only one form, and then they will see that particular form of the Lord. And Narada Muni also explained that though all the forms of the Lord are one, they're all Bhagavan, not separate entities, still Krishna is different. So here he began to explain the remarkable nature of Krishna. And when he appears in this material world and performs his pastimes, then he manifests these remarkable qualities, and great affection, and great charm, and great beauty, which is very distinct from everything in Vishnu and Narayana. So he began to praise realization of Krishna also. However, some people prefer to worship other forms. We can tell them about Krishna, but they may not be attracted. They may be attracted to Rama. So if they do so, they will get great happiness from that worship. They'll get prema, and they'll experience the highest bliss that way. But therefore, they will never change their relationship with the Lord and switch from Rama to Krishna or whatever. But once they've attained the object of their devotion, then they maintain that relationship with that form of the Lord. So, depending on how you worship, then the Lord responds. And he manifests a particular form according to the desires of the devotees. So that's why the Lord has many forms, because devotees have many desires. So he also explained about the devotees and how the devotees actually control the Lord. We know this, of course, in prema. The Lord is controlled by the devotees. And when that happens, then the Lord is no longer independent, which is, the very definition of God, to be independent. But when the devotee develops prema, then the Lord is no longer independent. But because of that, the Lord doesn't like to give prema, and that's why it's rare, because he doesn't want to get controlled by anybody. Nevertheless, in the spiritual world, everybody has prema there, and therefore the Lord's under the control of the devotees. He is dependent on the devotees. But that dependence of the Lord on the devotees is not a fault in the Lord. It's rather a great quality of the Lord, that he's willing to forget about his superiority and act in relation to the devotee in a very affectionate way. So it's not a fault on the Lord's part at all. Then he also explained something even more confidential. He explained how Krishna was more superior to Narayana. And then he explained that then there's one part of prema called Mahabhava. That's the highest stage of prema of all. And it's rarest and it's the most wonderful thing of all. And of course, this is achieved by the gopis of Vrindavan and not by others. But he also said, if you look at that Mahabhava, it may look like suffering. As we see with the gopis, they're always lamenting, they're fainting, they're crying, etc. So it may look like distress and lamentation. But this is actually the highest level. And though it is only external, the Lord can never tolerate the suffering of the devotee, and therefore he gives them great love. Okay. So, Narada Muni, he was in Vaikuntha with Gopa Kumara, talking to him, told him about Bhakti, told him about Krishna, told him about Prema. And then he said, you can go to Ayodhya and Dvaraka. Because there's something a little bit better there. I know you're dissatisfied here in Vaikuntha. So eventually, he went to Ayodhya in the spiritual world. And there he saw Ramchandra on his throne, and a huge palace, and all the signs of a great king. And looked something like Narayan, and very, very beautiful. Also a little bit different. He had a little more personal quality to him. And of course, he also had a bow in his hand, bow and arrow, etc. So he looked a little different. But he was modest and humble despite it being in such a grand setting. And he acted as a perfect king. And he acted according to proper religious behavior. So it was slightly better than the Vishnu form. A little more intimacy was there. But still, this form of Rama lacked the unique sweetness of Krishna that he had found by chanting his mantra, etc. So not quite satisfied there. And then Rama, who was very, very compassionate and also knows everybody's mind, told him, you better go to Dvaraka. There you will see Krishna. There you can be happy. So he sent him off with the bears, his servants, the bears. They went together to Dvaraka. Okay, now I got to switch here. Oops.
Yes.
I got to switch onto the other.
Straight away switch.
Where's the other one here? This one? Yeah. Oops.
This one.
Yeah. Okay. So he got to Dvaraka. And as we know, Dvaraka also was a very royal place, especially in the spiritual world. It was a fantastic place. And Krishna was there. So this was some consolation, Krishna. And he would reveal his two-armed form there. And he was worshipped by all sorts of people, all servants, etc. there. And when Krishna saw Gopa Kumara, then he greeted him very nicely. How are you? Is your health good? Are you free from misfortune, etc.? But Krishna felt a little disturbed by something, and Uddhava had to calm him down. The servants there in Dwarka, they noticed Gopa Kumar was dressed a little bit strangely because he looked like a cowherd. So they also discouraged, this is not proper in Dwarka to dress like this. But of course, Krishna, when he saw him, that's why he was disturbed, because he was reminded of the cowherd pastimes in Vrindavan. But then the people there said, the Yadavas said, you can't dress like this. This place is full of splendor, better than Vaikuntha, so you have to act differently and dress differently here. Huh? So a little bit dissatisfied. Narada came again. Before he came when he was in Vaikuntha, now he came there to Dwarka, and he began to explain a little more philosophy, how Krishna has many, many forms, and he expands into all sorts of things. And also, even Narada Muni gets expanded into many forms, and that's how he's able to be in many different places, because he was in Vaikuntha, now he's in Dwarka, and he's in the material world, etc. So the Lord allows people to have expansions also, like Narada Muni began expansions. But all of the associates of the Lord are his dedicated servants. So Gopa Kumar was staying with Uddhava, and Narada Muni was talking to Uddhava, and he praised Gopa Kumar as some very rare person, because he was seeking something that Narada Muni could not attain, and Uddhava could not attain. He was just a cowherd boy, but he wanted something higher than Dwarka, higher than Vaikuntha. So therefore Narada Muni praised him. He's seen all these places, but he's not satisfied. So this shows that he's on a higher level.
This is hanging. Like टूटने वाला. उल्टा ला.
So Narada Muni explained, now you're probably dissatisfied here also. So far away from here is the place called Goloka. So this is much beyond all other places, including Vaikuntha. It's the most remarkable place. But it's also the most difficult to get to. That same Goloka manifests within the material world. in Vrindavan and Mathura. And that is why Gopa Kumar had the good fortune of being born there, and then he went back there again several times. So he always developed this attraction for Krishna there. So that Goloka is manifested in Vrindavan in the material world. But you really can't access it except through prema. So you may go there, but in your material mind you won't see it. So you have prema, and then you will see the spiritual Vrindavan there. And you can get, if you have the purity, then you can also get prema like the inhabitants of Vrindavan. And you cannot get that prema if you worship the Lord in his powerful aspect. So one has to develop the proper mood of Vrindavan, then one can attain Krishna in Goloka. So Narada Muni explained that that place is very, very remarkable. All the trees are desire trees there. But yet, the Lord himself, Krishna, though he has all powers, he does not like to manifest his powers there in Vrindavan. He likes to hide them. And similarly, the other objects there don't manifest their powers. So he began to praise everything about that place and about Krishna. And so he praised the beauty of Krishna. It's so beautiful that even the birds and the bushes and the creepers, they all become ecstatic on seeing Krishna. So his extraordinary beauty. He explained the flute as being most remarkable also. By playing the flute, which is just a wooden stick, the sound that comes out of that is superior to the sound of the Vedas or any other form of speech. It's most attractive and most melodious. If anyone hears that flute, even the devatas or the yogis, they become completely bewildered and they develop ecstasy, as so do their wives. So Indra and Shiva and Brahma, they all, if they hear that flute, they all become completely bewildered with prema. So that is the special mark of Krishna. So when the sages hear that sound, then their meditation is finished. They come out of their meditation. When he plays his flute, then the planets stop moving. Generally, they can never stop moving. They're going like this all the time. But when they hear the sound of the flute, everything stops. All the planets stop. Time itself stops. And when they hear the flute, the animals, normally they move around, they stop. The planets, they move around and they stop. But the inanimate objects, like stones, etc., they begin to move. The conscious entities lose consciousness, and the unconscious entities gain consciousness. Everything turns opposite. The rivers flow, but when they hear the flute, they stop. So everything takes on opposite qualities when they hear the sound of the flute. It's just a remarkable thing, all due to ecstasy. So Narada Muni also explained to him that Krishna is very special because of his pastimes, and particularly the Ras Lila is most remarkable. In this Rasa dance, the Lord reveals his most remarkable qualities. So it shows the perfection of Bhagavan in all of his sweetness. And even Lakshmi could not get into that dance, even though she tried. So it's a very, very exclusive thing. But the Lord is very, very merciful to his devotees, so the gopis are allowed into that rasa dance, and there they're able to appreciate Krishna with all of his beauties, and they also express themselves through dancing and singing and whatever, all playing musical instruments, etc. And they show their devotion by their attractive kirtan, etc. And in this way, the Krishna and the gopis between them, they make a most remarkable scene in this. So, Krishna's attractive, his flute is attractive, the Leelas of Krishna are attractive, and the devotees are all attractive. All the devotees there are attracted to Krishna, and they develop this complete devotion to the son of Nanda. And they have this highest type of prema. So though, as I mentioned, this is the highest bliss, this place also shows the highest lamentation, because when there's separation, then the bliss turns into the most intense lamentation. So of all the different realities in the spiritual world, the people of Vrindavan have the greatest lamentation, and the gopis have the most lamentation of all. So it looks opposite again. But this separation and lamentation is part of prema itself, so it's actually a form of bliss. So we cannot go by the external appearance. So, though it looks like lamentation, it's not real lamentation. So, to attain Krishna in Goloka is very rare. And it is also secret. So we have many scriptures about artha and kama, how to enjoy in the material world, because that's what people want, and that people are less qualified, so there's a lot of scriptures for that. Dharma, which controls artha and kama, there's less scriptures. And less than that is the scriptures dealing with moksha or liberation, because there's less people qualified for liberation. And there's less scriptures about bhakti, because less people are qualified for bhakti. And there's less scriptures about prema for Krishna, because that's rarest of all. So though it is rare, it is actually the highest bliss, but unavailable to most people. So the scriptures, we will look around for talking about Krishna prema and Goloka and the gopis prema, but it is not commonly available in the scriptures. It's somewhat secret, and therefore people rarely attain that. Okay. So Narada Muni also glorified associates of Krishna. He glorifies. This is done in the Brihad Bhagavatam. They quote the words of Uddhava, who glorifies the gopis. Akura, he also glorifies the gopis. And the women of Hastinapur also glorify the gopis. So in this way, all different types of personalities glorify the gopis. So, Narada Muni, how Gopa Kumar should, that is, and Goloka. So he said, to do that, you have to follow after the prema of the residents of Vrindavan. You have to appreciate that type of prema. It's by Krishna's mercy only you can get that. So, to follow after the inhabitants of Vrindavan and develop a similar type of prema. So, following after the inhabitants of Vrindavan is good, but so he explains meditation, or smaranam, and singing is kirtan. These are very, very important. As well as that, one should associate with the devotees who are of similar nature, and another one, you should live in the Dhamma. You should live in to help you advance and attain Krishna. So he glorifies the living in the Dham as a very, very potent way of developing one's love for Krishna. He also explains something very interesting. That is that the process of bhakti is very different from the process of regular dharma, varnashram, etc. Because as you develop in bhakti, you become indifferent to that dharma. And one develops something called dainya, or humility. And the more you advance, the more that dainya will manifest, the more that humility will manifest. You go, the lower you feel, basically. So that's why we see many of the acharyas, they say, I'm the lowest of the low, because they feel that way. And why? Because they developed that dainya in relation to the Lord. So we know there are different levels of the inhabitants of Vrindavan are the highest, so they have the highest or most intense dainya. And among all the inhabitants there, the gopis have the most dainya. They feel the most unqualified. So they're the highest, but they feel the lowest. So, it's through that dainya also one can develop prema, but when you develop the dainya also manifests, that humility manifests in a more remarkable way. So, prema and that humility at all times. So somehow or other, if you want to go to Goloka and meet Krishna and serve Krishna, then you have to develop prema. And so one has to develop a longing for that prema as a result of one's bhakti. So without that prema, everything is useless. It's like vegetables without salt. If you don't have the prema, everything else is tasteless. Or it's like taking a meal without hunger. Or studying scripture without understanding anything. Or a garden without fruits. So if you do bhakti, you don't get prema. That is similar. So if you want to know about prema, then you should meet Radha, because she is incarnation of prema. But if she speaks about prema, it may be difficult to understand also. But if she does, then at least you have a chance of understanding it. Some chance, at least. So Narada Muni explains how Gopa Kumara went to Vaikuntha, which is incomparable bliss, etc. He went to Ayodhya, then he went to Dvaraka. Still, he's not very satisfied in all these different places. Since the places are greater than Svargaloka or Brahmaloka, but still, Gopa Kumara was not satisfied. So he said, you have to go to Mathura again. Go back again. And there you will get your desire fulfilled finally. So, following Narada's instructions, Gopa Kumara went from Dvaraka back down into Vrindavan again. So this time he was completely absorbed in kirtan, singing the names of Krishna, singing very loudly. And when he did so, Krishna appeared. Krishna was in Vrindavan. He found Krishna there in Vrindavan in the material world. Very, very wonderful. And of course, Gopa Kumara fell on the ground and fainted, and Krishna began to wipe the dust off his body, etc., and take care of him with his lotus hand, cooling him off, etc. But then, suddenly, again he was traveling through the universe and going out of the universe and going through the spiritual world and going upward and upward and upward. Past Vaikuntha Loka, you can see Vaikuntha and Ayodhya and all these other places, Dvaraka, etc. He passed everything. And then he got to Goloka. So he's very amazed by all of this. And then he saw this place above all the other worlds, all the other lokas. This was the place he longed to see, and he finally got this place. And what was remarkable is it looked like this Vrindavan in the material world, the same place. But it was a very, very remarkable place. And there he saw Krishna. And Krishna was coming there with all of the cows and his friends. And then he saw, he said, "Oh, Sri Rama, here's my friend Sarupa. I'm meeting with Sarupa here." And he introduced him to all of the cowherd boys, etc. So Krishna brought Sarupa back, and then Sarupa, he would eat with, he sat him down and he ate together with Nanda and Balaram and all these people like that. And then he saw the gopis there also bathing Krishna. He saw Krishna go to sleep at night, and then in the middle of the night he would get up and go for Ras Leela and come back in the morning like this. So he saw the daily activities of Krishna. But Sarupa was cowherd boy in Sakyarasa. He was in Sakyarasa. Yeah. But even though he was chanting this mantra of Krishna, he didn't aspire for that, for Madhurya Rasa. He aspired for Sakya of Krishna, so that's what he got. So all the people that were dedicated to Krishna, but they also thought that I'm the dearest to Krishna. Somehow he's very attracted to me. So Krishna was satisfied each of the devotees and responded to them very properly. And therefore, they were always convinced that Krishna likes me so much. However, objectively speaking, one can see that ultimately Krishna is attracted to the gopis most of all. But then among the gopis again, Krishna will satisfy each one, and that gopi will say, "I'm the best of all the gopis." But of course, Krishna satisfies each one. Still, though they are in that high position, they never think of themselves as superior to others. So they always think of them as the lowest of the low, and I'm not very qualified to serve Krishna. So that's the humility manifesting in those particular gopis. So the inhabitants of Vrindavan always think that Vishnu is equal to all of them. But we find in Goloka there's different types of mercy manifested for different types of persons. One other thing he saw there is the pastimes repeated themselves. Various pastimes were there and they repeat themselves, like Kaliya would come and then later on Kaliya would come again. But they forgot about it. Okay? Or he would go away to Mathura, but then suddenly he was back again. And then again he would go away. Then they forget again. So all these different pastimes that appear in the material world were also there, but in a slightly different way. And then they would forget about them again and again. So everything was always very fresh. So, very, very remarkable place. Okay. And the remarkable thing was, even Krishna forgot everything. So he didn't say, "Oh, we had that pastime yesterday. Why are we doing it today?" So he also seemed to forget everything. So Sarupa was there in Goloka, and he realized actually the place in the material world in Vrindavan is the same thing. So he would go back and forth, and it was no different. He would go one place, he would go the other place. So, in this way, he appreciated both places. So, in the last chapter, then, we come back to the other story with the Brahmana, who was the first Brahmana who got the mantra from Durga Devi and went to Vrindavan, and then he saw there this young cowherd boy, that this was this Gopa Kumara actually, who was Sarupa. Then Sarupa told his whole story. So, one time Radha called Sarupa, and he says, there's some Brahmana who's my devotee. So you go there and you give him some good instruction and help him get Krishna's grace. So on the instruction of Radha, Gopa Kumara was there in Vrindavan, and he attracted that Brahman from Assam. So he became overjoyed with that instruction, even though he had Miss Krishna's company. He went there and he saw Sarupa, or Sarupa saw the Brahmana, and he talked to the Brahmana. As he explained everything to him, but even then, somehow he didn't seem to develop everything quickly. So he put his hand on the Brahmana's head, and by that Shakti somehow or other, he got some spiritual experience. And he could understand everything about what Gopa Kumara had told him. So both of them were there, and then they saw Krishna come. And Krishna ran towards them, and he embraced them. So they're all in very great ecstasy when they saw each other. So Sarupa was there, and then there was this new person there also. That was the Brahmana. So he took off his ornaments and he began to decorate the Brahmana. So he also looked like a cowherd boy. So he was very, very merciful. So meanwhile, they continued pastimes, and Sridhama was there, made a pillow for him, and the friends were serving him in various ways, fanning him, dressing his hair, massaging his feet, hands, etc. And then in the evening, they went back to Vrindavan, and the new person, Brahmana, was given over to Sarupa to take care of, etc. And they went into the cowherd village. So that more or less ends the story. So this story occurs within a narrative in which Parikshit is giving instructions to his mother. So, and his mother was asking about, what happens to these people of Vrindavan? What's their goal? Like there's different levels of prema. So obviously through this whole narration, we find that the people of Vrindavan are the highest of all. They're eternal and they're the highest. They're not people in the material world who die and give up their bodies. They're actually eternal associates of the Lord, and they have the highest prema in the highest planet. So Parikshit encourages his mother to also reach Goloka somehow or other. But very rare, but nevertheless that can be achieved if you get the mercy of Krishna's devotees. So therefore he encourages his mother to take the dust from the feet of the devotees who have that love for Krishna. And the last section of the book is a glorification of Goloka by quoting from different scriptures. Some from Bhagavatam, some from, I think, Brahma Samhita and Gautamiya Tantra and other works. To show that actually Goloka is not a fiction, but it's a mention in the scriptures. So it's about among all the places, it's the highest place of all. So, in other words, it's the highest place. Okay, I think that's, I think we'll just end there. Fine. Okay. Hare Krishna.
You can ask for any question. Yeah.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna Mataji. So if there are any questions for Maharaj, we could ask those questions now.
Yes. First of all, I would like to thank Maharaj on behalf of the Bhakti team for enlightening children in this topic. Maharaj, at humble obeisances at the Lotus Feet. This is the first time they are listening on Gopa Kumara Maharaj. These children are like Gurukul of Damodar Desh, and we have weekly classes for them on various. Gopa Kumara is the first time they are listening, and thank you, Maharaj. Thank you so much for taking their time.
Okay, Hare Krishna.
Do you have any questions?
Yes, Prabhu, there's from chat box. Is it not Rasabas when the Vishnu Dutas praised Gopa Kumara affection to Krishna? Shubhangini. Mataji, what is the question? Is it not
Rasabas.
Rasabas?
Vishnu Dutas to praise Krishna. They said you should act like us and get 4 arms and show off opulence, etc. And don't do kirtan in front of Vishnu, chant prayers, formally. So some of them were of that mood. There were a few who was actually pleased by kirtan also, which is true. So in other words, nothing false there. And of course, the Vishnu Dutas also said that kirtan is the process by which you can attain the Lord. But it was Narada Muni that actually gave the intimate instructions about how to get to Goloka.
Thank you, Maharaj. I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Okay. That's it.
Any other questions, Mataji?
I think it's
Wonderful.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Mataji, for organizing this for the Dridha Bhakti children. It's such a wonderful opportunity. I think now, as a next step, that Maharaj has given a prelude, rather like a story, that now they should create that interest for them to read the book.
Well, they make a play. They can make a drama.
Oh, Maharaj is saying they can make a drama, a play. So I think that would be a wonderful thing. So if they could actually do the entire story like a play and if they can enact it.
Yes, Prabhu. Thank you, Maharaj. Thank you for that instruction. Definitely, we'll try and we'll send a video.
That's the instruction and the next step for the children to hear.
Yes, Prabhu. Yes,
Thank you so much, Mataji, and thank you all the devotees. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare.
Rama.
Bhagavatam ki jai, Bhanu Swami ki jai, His Holiness Bhanu Swami Maharaj ki jai, Srila Prabhupada. Anande, Hari Hari Bol.
Thank you, Prabhu, for all your support. Thank you so much. Hare